Welcome back to Grim Advice with Gretta Myers. You've entered the grimoire with 2 M's. Let's turn some pages together. Yes, it's been a minute. I am aware. It is nice and short today, though. And in a certain village. So, I didn't even title it. Wow. Hello. I'm out of practice. Okay. Without further ado, the lazy spinner. In a certain village there once lived a man and his wife, and the wife was so idle that she would never work at anything. Whatever her husband gave her to spin, she did not get done, and what she did spin, she did not wind, but let it all remain entangled in a heap. If the man scolded her, she was always ready with her tongue, and said, "Well, how should I wind it when I have no reel? Just you go into the forest and get me one." "If that is all," said the man, "then I will go into the forest and get some wood for making reels." Then the woman was afraid that if he had the wood, he would make her a reel of it, and she would have to wind her yarn off, and then begin to spin again. She thought a little, and then a lucky idea occurred to her, and she secretly followed the man into the forest. When he climbed into a tree to choose and cut the wood, she crept into the thicket below where he could not see her, and cried, "He who cuts wood for reel shall die, and he who winds shall perish." The man listened, laid down his axe for a moment, and began to consider what that could mean. "Hello," he said at last. "What that could have been. My ears must have been singing. I won't alarm myself for nothing." So he again seized the axe and began to hew. And then again there came a cry from below, "He who cuts wood for reels shall die, and he who winds shall perish." He stopped and felt afraid and alarmed, and pondered over the circumstance, but when a few moments had passed, he took heart again, and a third time he stretched out his hand for the axe and began to cut. But someone called out a third time and said loudly, "He who cuts wood for reels shall die, and he who winds shall perish." That was enough for him, and all inclination had departed from him, so he hastily descended the tree and set out on his way home. The woman ran as fast as she could by byways as to get home first. So when he entered the parlor, she put on an innocent look as if nothing had happened, and said, "Well, have you brought a nice piece of wood for reels?" "No," said he, "I see very well that winding won't do," and told her what had happened to him in the forest, and from that time forth left her in peace about it. Nevertheless, after some time, the man began to complain about this disorder in the house. "Wife," said he, "it is really a shame that the spun yarn should lie there all entangled." "I'll tell you what," said she, "as we still don't come by any reel, go up into the loft, and I will stand down below, and will throw the yarn up to you, and you will throw it down to me. We shall get a skein after all." "Yes, that will do," said the man. So they did that, and when it was done, he said, "The yarn is in skeins now, it must be boiled." And the woman was again distressed, and she certainly said, "Yes, we will boil it next morning early," but she was secretly contriving another trick. Early in the morning she got up, lighted a fire, and put the kettle on, only instead of the yarn she put in a lump of tow, and let it boil. After that she went to the man, who was still lying in bed, and said to him, "I must just go out. You must get up and look after the yarn which is in the kettle on the fire, but you must be at hand at once. Mind that, for if the rooster should happen to crow, you are not attending to the yarn, it will become tow." The man was willing, and took good care not to loiter. He got up as quickly as he could and went into the kitchen, but when he reached the kettle and peeped in, he saw to his horror nothing but a lump of tow. Then the poor man was as still as a mouse, thinking he had neglected it and was to blame, and in future still know more about yarn and spinning. But you yourself must own she was an odious woman. I do own that. She was kind of terrible. Okay, couple things. On the one hand, yes, it is. Some things are really, really hard, especially when one has, like, mental illness. So certain things become really difficult. And that's fair. That's fair. However, hold on, we'll get there. So there's the one hand, I will say that things can be hard, especially when you are impeded by something kind of out of your control. Pretty much out of, you can't control chemicals in your brain. Anyways, on the other hand, Okay, props to the dude. However, he was undeterred, even though some spooky voice in the forest is like, straight up, whatever you're doing, you're gonna die. You're gonna die. And he continued. But then, even then, he stopped when he knew. So, like, just props to this dude. So on the one hand, it's hard to do, especially if you have a mental illness. I'm not saying this woman did. And that's no excuse. However, it is something to recognize. On the other hand, she put in a lot of effort to be able to not do the things that it really would have just been easier to do in the first place. But also, like, that was pretty toxic and emotionally manipulative. And so then the dude is like, oh, it's my fault. I'm a terrible person. Like, no, that's trash. Like, if you're gonna, like, avoid a task, go ahead and avoid the task, but don't drag other people down with you. That's all I'm gonna say. Alright, my gremlins. Thank you for joining us for another Happily Ever After, or not so Happily Ever After. That's up for you to decide, and what you decide is valid. Because you're valid. You are. Either way, this is the end for today's episode, so tune in later, and we can learn more and turn new pages together.